Don't embarrass us, my mother hissed as we entered the courthouse. Just stay quiet and let the real lawyers take care of this. I didn't reply. My heels clicked confidently against the marble floor, echoing louder than her words. My father walked ahead, his expression tight and unreadable, pretending I wasn't there. I was used to it. My name is Anna Thompson, 31 years old. To my parents, I've always been the failure, the dropout, the disgrace, the child they learned to omit when relatives asked how their daughters were doing. We were in Omaha, Nebraska, for one reason. My parents were evicting a tenant named Claire Mitchell, a single mother who had dared to request repairs before paying rent. They owned 3 old rental properties, inheritances from my late grandfather, and managed them like lords ruling over peasants. When Claire withheld rent over a leaking ceiling and black mold, they called it defiance. Called it survival. My mother's voice broke my thoughts. I still don't understand why you're here. Because you don't know me anymore, I thought. You never did. They had no idea I'd gone to college. No idea I'd finished law school. No idea I'd passed the bar exam. The last time we spoke, my father had thrown my clothes onto the lawn and told me I'd never amount to anything. He wasn't entirely wrong. Back then I was living in my car, starving and alone. But I refused to crawl back. Inside the courtroom, I spotted Claire sitting nervously at the defendant's table. Her eyes were tired, her dress faded, and her hands trembled slightly as she held onto her purse. She reminded me of myself years ago, cornered, powerless, and clinging to dignity. My mother motioned for me to sit behind them. I ignored her and walked toward Claire instead. "Excuse me," I said softly. "I'm your attorney." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "You're what?" Behind me I heard my mother gasp. My father muttered a curse. "What do you think you're doing?" he snapped. "I'm doing my job," I said, unbothered. "You can't be serious," my mother scoffed. "You aren't a lawyer." I calmly opened my briefcase and held up my bar card. "Actually, I am." The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with a sharp gaze. Judge Patricia Holbrook. I'd argued before her once in a tenant rights case. She recognized me immediately. "Counsel, please approach," she said. I introduced myself. "Anna Thompson, Your Honor, representing Ms. Claire Mitchell." The judge nodded slightly, as if silently approving. My parents' attorney, a pompous man in an expensive suit, rolled his eyes. This should be quick. He had no idea. Their attorney painted Claire as lazy and irresponsible. I countered with maintenance requests, photos of water damage, and medical records showing her daughter's asthma from mold exposure. Every word stripped away my parents' illusion of respectability. By the time I finished, the room had gone silent except for my mother's shallow breathing. My father's temper broke first. "She's lying. Those pictures could be from anywhere." The judge's gavel cracked through the room. "Mr. Thompson, control yourself." My mother turned scarlet. The courtroom saw what I'd known my whole life. Behind their social facade was cruelty wrapped in pride. "Based on the evidence," the judge said firmly, "this court finds in favor of the defendant. The plaintiffs are ordered to repair the property and compensate the tenant for medical expenses." Claire wept quietly. I felt her gratitude through her trembling hand. My parents stared at me with disbelief, like they were seeing a ghost wearing a power suit. "You've destroyed this family," my mother spat once we stepped into the hallway. "No," I said calmly. "You destroyed it the day you threw your daughter out." He turned pale. My father glared but said nothing. They left without another word. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Harold Dean, my late grandfather's attorney. He requested a meeting, something about a trust in your name. My heart stopped. I hadn't spoken to my grandfather in years, but he'd always shown me quiet kindness. I went to the law office that Friday. "Your grandfather left you a trust," Harold said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Your parents were not aware of it. The funds were held until your 30th birthday." I blinked at the number on the page. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. And then Harold hesitated. "There's something else," something he wanted you to see. Inside a sealed envelope was my grandfather's personal journal. The final entries were erratic, fearful. He wrote about pressure from his son, my father, regarding property documents and debts. The last entry stopped mid-sentence. The date matched the day he'd fallen down the stairs. I sat in my apartment that night reading until dawn. The words were clear. He'd been afraid. I called Melissa, my sister, who still lived at home. She hesitated to talk but agreed to meet me secretly. "Anna," she whispered, "there are things I can't say on the phone." We met at a diner outside town. She looked older, thinner, exhausted. "They always told me you ran away," she said quietly. I shook my head. "They kicked me out." Tears welled in her eyes. "I believe you." For the first time in years we hugged. Melissa told me she'd found a box in Dad's office marked, "Estate, Private." We returned that night after my parents had gone out. Inside the box were forged signatures, fake medical reports, and a rewritten version of our grandfather's will. It was all there, proof of murder for inheritance. Melissa trembled. "What do?" "We do what I was trained to do," I said. "We build a case." For the next month, I gathered evidence quietly. Witness statements, financial transfers, and the old autopsy report. The truth was uglier than I imagined. Detective Sarah Linton from the Omaha Police Department listened carefully as I presented everything. After a long silence, she said, "This isn't just inheritance fraud, Anna. This could be homicide." An investigation opened that same week. News spread fast in our small town. My parents denied everything, calling me a vindictive daughter. But the evidence didn't lie. When forensic tests confirmed traces of sedatives in my grandfather's preserved tissue samples, the case became criminal. It was raining the night they were arrested. Melissa stood beside me on the sidewalk, watching silently as officers led them out in handcuffs. My mother's last words before entering the car. "You'll regret this, Anna." But for the first time I didn't feel afraid. The courtroom was packed with reporters. Judge Holbrook presided again. I sat beside the prosecution as their legal consultant. Across from me, my parents sat pale and defiant. I took the stand, voice steady. I recounted years of manipulation, the eviction case, and the discovery of the forged documents. Every truth I'd buried was finally spoken aloud. Melissa testified next. Her voice broke, but her courage held. Their attorney tried to twist our motives, painting me as a jealous daughter and Melissa as a brainwashed pawn. But then the prosecutor revealed a recording Melissa had found, our father threatening my grandfather days before his death. The courtroom fell silent. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and spoke clearly. "Guilty on all counts." My mother wept silently. My father stared straight ahead, empty and defeated. Justice, after decades of silence, had finally arrived. Reporters hounded us for weeks. Melissa and I gave one brief statement. Truth does not destroy families, lies do. We moved out of Omaha shortly after. The trust my grandfather left allowed us to start anew. I used part of it to open a legal aid clinic, the Holbrook Center for Tenant Rights, named after the judge who'd given me my first chance to stand tall. Melissa began therapy. I visited the grave we never could before, our grandfather's. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "You were right about them. And I made it right." Weeks later, I found a letter in my grandfather's old box addressed to me. It read, "If you ever feel small, remember, truth does not shout. It stands quietly and lets time prove it right." I cried for hours. We settled in Lincoln, where I joined a public interest law firm. Melissa started teaching art to underprivileged kids. For the first time, life felt peaceful. Claire came to visit one afternoon with her daughter. Their apartment had been repaired, their lives stable. "You changed everything for us," she said. "No," I smiled. "You changed it for yourself. I just helped you be heard." Sometimes I think about that courtroom the day I stood against my parents. It wasn't just a case. It was me reclaiming the voice they'd tried to silence. The Holbrook Center grew. Volunteers, interns, and clients who believed justice still existed. And every time I helped a tenant win a case, I thought of my grandfather and Claire. Melissa and I planted a tree at our grandfather's grave every year. One spring she asked, "Do you ever miss them?" Pause. "No. But I forgive them." And I meant it. Years later, when I received an award for advocacy, I stood before a crowd and said, "You don't have to come from goodness to do good. Sometimes you just have to rise from where you were thrown." The applause felt like a lifetime of silence finally breaking. I returned to the courthouse in Omaha one last time. Empty, echoing, familiar. This was where I'd stood against everything that had broken me. I smiled, touched the worn wooden bench, and whispered, "I did it, Grandpa." And then I walked away, free, whole, and finally home. Then,